Okay, next up we have kind of a series of reports, kind of all related to COVID-19. So first we're going to start with Lincoln County Public Health, presented by Nicole Field.
Good morning. So just to give you a quick numbers overview for the state of Oregon, there are 2,680 positive cases of COVID-19 in the state. That includes 5 cases in Lincoln County, 3 of which are recovered cases. We're seeing a lot more testing going on, as we have over the past few weeks as well. So we have 591 negative tests in our county as well. We got some great data from Samaritan this week, kind of drilling down a little bit more into the demographics of their testing. So we're seeing actually a lot more people who are asymptomatic receive testing. So that could be that they are going in for a routine surgery. They have had contact with someone who is confirmed to have COVID-19. If they're pregnant and going in for delivery, they're going to be tested. So they're really ramping up their asymptomatic testing. They're also going to be working on a pilot program with us to test some of our fishing fleet. So the Trawlers Association here contacted Public Health requesting some assistance with testing their fleet, who's going to be going out in mid-May. And we've seen on a larger scale with like some of the Navy vessels and some of the cruise ships that it can be really, really scary if there's a COVID outbreak on a vessel. And so we've agreed to help them with their testing and test their entire fleet. We're in partnership with Samaritan on this, and it's going to be our first large-scale testing of folks who are asymptomatic and coming into town as seasonal workers. We're getting notified quite a bit of several businesses and companies in the county that are getting a large influx of seasonal workers. So we're really trying to get ahead of this. We have a standing order written, so now we can do that large-scale testing. Our health officer was really instrumental in getting that written, and so we're really hopeful that this will help us be ready for upcoming seasons and upcoming large groups of folks who will be coming into Lincoln County to work. I think that it'll also it'll be something to kind of keep an eye on with the data that we've been reporting on a daily basis, since we're doing a large-scale testing of asymptomatic folks. So just something to be mindful of, that we're going to be putting a large set of data in there as well. We continue to work on our long-term care facilities. We've seen statewide that is an area that we really want to concentrate on to prevent any outbreaks. So our long-term care facilities in the county have been super receptive and responsive and helpful and willing to work with us, which has been really great, because we want to make sure that they're prepared and they feel very supported by us and by the hospital system and the first responders to make sure that we have done everything we can to help prevent an outbreak in our long-term care facilities. We also brought on Anna Gill last week. She is our Spanish language outreach coordinator, and she is working with the Latinx community in Lincoln County to make sure that they are getting timely, consistent information about COVID-19 in a way that is accessible for them. And then we also have a new website up on the county site for some of the reopening guidance that we've been seeing from the state. It's just kind of a one-stop shop for that information to hopefully make it a little bit more accessible, because we know that it is coming from a variety of different places. So we wanted to make that available to folks who may be looking for it. And that is the majority of my update. I can take questions now.
Yeah, I have a question. So go ahead, Commissioner Hunt. I'll do that.
Well, okay. My question, Nicole. I understand that when it comes to developing or meeting some of the governor's gating criteria, that it's on a regional basis. Can you talk about that and identify the other counties with which we would be regionalized?
Absolutely. So it's a bit confusing, because some of the reopening guidelines are on a county level and some are on a regional level, like you mentioned, and we have to meet both before we're ready to reopen. I know Rebecca Austin is meeting this afternoon at 3 with the other counties that are in our region for reopening to kind of assess their readiness and go through some of the criteria. The other counties in our region are Lynn and Benton counties, and then also Marion, Yamhill, and Polk counties. So we have some new partners and some partners that we're very, very used to working with, but we're all willing to kind of get together and discuss what we need to do to meet those gating criteria.
Thank you.
My question is also around kind of gating criteria. I would just add to what Nicole said that it is really confusing which criteria is as a region and which is county specific. I think we can hope to maybe have some clarity around that in the next couple of days from the governor's office. I had heard Friday after they released that new draft criteria that there would be additional stuff released to make that more clear, because I think they've been getting a lot of phone calls and stuff about it. But my question for you, Nicole, is when it comes specifically to testing and positive cases, I don't have the document in front of me right now, but you have to be increasing testing and decreased positive results for so many days. My understanding is that we currently, just talking about Lincoln County, that we do currently meet that gating criteria. Is that correct?
That is correct. We've seen, we've just seen a handful of cases here in Lincoln County. So we do meet that criteria, and we are increasing testing pretty significantly still. I mean, the hospitals are basically telling us that they aren't running at full capacity just because they don't have enough people seeking tests to run at that full capacity, and that's why we're kind of able to do some of these pilot projects like our trawlers project to get people in the door to get tested. It's worth noting that Clatsop County did a similar project. They had about 120 seasonal workers coming into town and tested all of them and ended up with 11 new positives. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we continue with these testing projects.
I would also add that, as we look at having the ability to do increased testing to essential workers that, beyond healthcare, that's the most obvious one that comes up. But I would also say that we probably need to look at grocery store workers. It's a critical piece of infrastructure doing this that do have a lot of contact with the public. So perhaps we can build a pilot program for them similarly to what we're doing with the trial fleet.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And this is kind of giving us the opportunity to get our procedures and policies in place so that we're ready to do this and just kind of implement it as needed for other businesses in the community, because we'd like to get as much testing done as possible.
Okay, Commissioner Hall,
sure.
Questions? No, from you. Okay, Commissioner Hunt, I saw you try to talk there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I follow-up question to Nicole. My understanding is that one of the gating criteria is to be testing 30 people per 1,000 people within the county on a weekly basis. And simple math would say we need to be testing about 150 people weekly in our county based on our population of near 50,000. In the information that I've been tracking, we've been averaging somewhere around half of that goal, although last week I believe we were near 100 or at 100. So what's the status, I guess, of being able to make that gating criteria as far as testing 150 people per week within the county?
So what we're hearing from Samaritan is that number is absolutely possible right now. They are able to handle that volume. They've just opened another site in Waldport to help serve our South County residents as well. I think what we need to work on is just getting more people approved for testing or getting those physicians' orders for testing. Because right now we're just not seeing enough people who are seeking testing to meet that number, if that makes sense. So the guidelines right now around asymptomatic people are still a little bit squishy from the state as far as, they don't want just people walking in off the street getting tested for COVID quite yet. However, I think that we want to kind of implement some processes around some of our vulnerable populations and some of our essential workers so that we can get those numbers up and just kind of help with overall community safety for people that are having a lot of touches with community members.
Okay, thank you. Could you clarify when you say testing asymptomatic people, what that means?
Sure. So if I were to, call my provider today and say, hey, I want to get tested for COVID, and they ask me, why? Are you having any like cough, shortness of breath, fever? And I say no, they're generally not just going to order that for me. So those are the asymptomatic folks. The asymptomatic folks that are getting tested right now include like first responders, healthcare workers, folks that are having routine surgical procedures now that that is opened back up, and then our labor and delivery moms. And so those are kind of the categories of asymptomatic folks that are getting tested. But I'm hearing now that, depending on the provider a little bit, if you're even running a fever, they'll test you for COVID. So it's just kind of having one of those symptoms to make you a symptomatic individual instead of just kind of feeling fine, business as usual, but want to get tested because you're curious or you're wanting to just kind of know your status. And we're not quite there yet where we're just testing everyone who wants to be tested. Does that help a little bit?
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. The other thing I just wanted to kind of mention for everybody listening is that I think, as Nicole or I said earlier, we did get kind of a second draft of gatekeeping criteria and Governor Brown's kind of phased approach for reopening. We are working hard to get some clarity on which of those gatekeeping criteria you have to meet as a region or which ones are to meet as a county. So we're trying to get that kind of sorted out, and we do have public health staff actively working on kind of filling out or creating that draft application. Like I said, getting clarity on which is regional and which is county is important. Critical, we have to have that, but we are actively working on creating that application for reopening. It's also super unclear when officially it opens up for applications or how long an application sits before it's looked at or any of that stuff we don't know. But we are working both internally and with partners, because a lot of those criteria depend on partners as well, like Samaritan, to basically have ourselves, an application and make sure that we are able to meet those criteria. So I think there's been a lot of public concern that we're not working on reopening, and I think we're working extremely hard, both in understanding those criteria and making sure that we can meet them. Okay, next on our list is Rachael Maddox-Hughes, Lincoln County Incident Management Team Finance Section Leader. Thank you, Nicole, and Rachael, updates from you. Yes, maybe an explanation of what you're doing for us.
Absolutely. Hello, Commissioners. So essentially, I am your resource point person for helping to both recover costs, but also to find resources for building back better post-COVID. So at a very foundational level, the county has been approved for FEMA public assistance. However, we are waiting to submit those costs right now for reimbursement until we find out more about the state stabilization dollars and how, if, or when they are coming down to the county level. When we have that information, we'll be able to have a better idea of what all of the costs are that we can submit and to which funding pot. In addition, last Friday, we submitted a pre-approval letter to FEMA for non-congregate housing. It's good that we got it in on Friday, because as my understanding is that as part of the reopening process, we have to have housing available for people to self-isolate if they don't have the means to do so themselves. We've submitted for pre-approval for 100 people for a month-long process, and that can be renewed. This will be focused on people who have COVID but don't need to be hospitalized but do need to isolate, people who are under monitoring, i.e. those who have been exposed and are being monitored for symptoms, and then for our vulnerable homeless population as well, to really stop the spread of COVID amongst that community. In addition, we are working on an FCC telehealth grant that is up to $1 million in funding to really facilitate better reach into the community during this time of isolation. That will be submitted this week. In addition, we are working on a community development block grant, one of the county's first in a while, for economic development. We're working with Business Oregon on that and should be submitting here in the near future. Along those same lines, so that initial grant would be $150. I know Wayne is looking to see if we have other resources in the community that we can help seed that fund with. We will be working with the lending branch of Dev Northwest as our fund manager. That was a request from Business Oregon so that they can get this money moved really quickly. And we are working with other communities in Lincoln County, such as Newport and the city of Lincoln City, to see if we can potentially put together a one-stop portal for economic development support for local businesses to make it as easy as possible for the end user to just come in and one-stop shop. Katie and I are meeting with the Early Learning Department to look at how we get money for childcare from the CARES Act this week. And then, let's see. Oh, we did find out that FEMA has approved a narrow area for food aid for local organizations who have seen an increased rise in need to feed their clients and are not able to meet those resources, those needs with other resources. And then I'm working with Wiley Thompson as well to find funding around kind of the Building Back Better framework that we are in the process of putting together. And that's it. Do I have questions?
Commissioner Hunt, questions?
No, I think that is enlightening as to how broad and comprehensive activities are as far as trying to obtain funds in support of the needs of our citizens.
Commissioner Hall, questions?
No, just good to have an update on what's happening behind the scenes, and good work. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am available if there's other opportunities that come up. Sorry, Commissioner Jacobson. If there's other opportunities that you hear of or come up, or if you would like to know if there are resources available, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you. Just a couple of things I would clarify about hotel vouchering. We have had a hotel vouchering program going on this entire time. That's just something the county just stepped up and did, not knowing if that was something FEMA would reimburse for or whatever. We just knew we needed to do that, so we did it. So we all along had some type of plan and ability to put people in hotel rooms that were COVID positive or high risk, or needed to isolate. But the plan you're talking about is basically taking what we have already been doing and kind of shoving it or matching it into resources available to FEMA. So we're kind of shifting from us just kind of getting it done into tapping into a resource in the way that FEMA sort of wants us to do it, so we can access those resources there. So I just wanted to clarify that we had already been doing that. We're simply just trying to do it in a way that that FEMA wants us to do it, so that we can capture some of that cost reimbursement.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. I just wanted to thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate having you on our team. There's been a lot of funding that's been put out, mostly at the national level, some state as well. And it became quickly evident that just tracking those dollars, advocating for those dollars, and trying to make sure that we, can apply on time and understand all the criteria, which, you have to just go completely in the weeds with to understand it needed to be someone's job. So I appreciate you stepping up and doing that for us.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, moving on to Wiley Thompson, who is the Regional Director of Coastal OSU Extension Services. Wiley has been writing our recovery plan for us. Really appreciate Wiley's ability to step up too. I just feel like we have a wonderful group of community partners who've been willing to help us. So Wiley, update on the recovery plan.
Hi, Commissioner Jacobson. Thank you. So right now, we, got two big efforts, and I just want to reemphasize sort of the recovery mindset. Again, the focus is on building back better and not wasting the crisis. As we look around what COVID has done, we can readily acknowledge the impacts that it has had on our communities, our economy, our individual households, and but we really, if we look hard at it, we can see that it has sort of shined a light in the dusty corners and exposed those vulnerabilities that we had in our society, and that's where we want to focus on. And as Rachael has mentioned, in previous meetings and even today, there's kind of like these pillars that we're going to look at, and we're trying to form our recovery teams at the higher level right now. That's the major effort. Community equity and resilience, economic recovery, our social services, housing, and our infrastructure, which is really going to be dialed in on broadband communications and putting access of information in people's hands. We're also meeting later today looking at how do we crowdsource project areas or ideas for project areas and community innovation from our community through social media. And I have a bunch of folks that are really helping out on that. So subject to questions, that's what I'll have for my update.
Commissioner Hall, questions from you?
Wiley, this all sounds really great. At what stage are we going to have any kind of a draft written document that we could review and maybe open up for some level of public feedback?
Commissioner Hall, good question. I have a PowerPoint with all of this drawn out right now, so we could present that whenever you like. The holes are, again, the names for those higher level teams, and then building the project areas, which we hope to get through crowdsourcing. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Hunt, questions?
While I was making some notes, could you go through the areas that you talked about as far as the recovery plan?
Absolutely, Commissioner Hunt. So the areas that we are going to use they roughly align with the state recovery functions, and those typically, as the state plan is written, is more for like a kinetic event, earthquake, flood, fire, and the damage and impact that are associated with those. So we took those and we drew them across into this event, and they were economic recovery. The health services, we understand that that's being driven by things much bigger than us, though I will acknowledge that we are going to find ways to improve our access, delivery, and our health services in our community along the way. But that has so much behind it that we chose not to make that a major focus. But social services, housing, infrastructure, and under infrastructure specifically focused on broadband, telecommunications. The state recovery functions focus more on like roads, getting power lines back up, things like that. And the other function that the state has in their plan is they look at like the DLCD functions. So re-looking at kind of boundaries, how land use has changed after a disaster. We're not seeing the need for that. So we made a deliberate switch after consultation, and we're making a pillar for recovery under we're calling that community equity and resilience. Okay. So that could span across all of these areas when you think about it.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Couldn't get myself off mute. Sorry about that. A point of clarification I just wanted to make is that the recovery plan that Wiley is working on us is attached to but separate than the reopening plan. The reopening plan that we talked about with Nicole earlier is really about what we have to do to meet state criteria for reopening. Most of the businesses that were closed due to state orders, not county ones or not city ones. The exception of that is lodging closures. So what Wiley's working is kind of the recovery plan from all the events, not so much the reopening plan. Those are kind of two separate documents that obviously, are attached in some ways, but kind of different things. So I just kind of want to make sure that it's clear. All right, thank you, Wiley. I appreciate the update. And it sounds like from Commissioner Hall's suggestion, maybe at an additional BOC meeting, we can actually have you go through the PowerPoint and maybe get some public feedback from that.
Gladly.
Okay, Dave Price, OCCC Small Business Development Center Director. Dave, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner Jacobson.
Hey, thank you for being here, and thank you for all the work I know that you and your team have been doing. We just kind of wanted to hear an update. I know that you've been working with some of our emergency management staff, with Wiley and Rachael and others, but we wanted to hear, what things you're working on. And so take it away.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an interesting time, and I just want to give a quick couple of shout outs. I had the opportunity to take a look at a draft of the PowerPoint that Wiley referenced just now, and it is robust and thorough, and I look forward to watching the video when you folks get a chance to pour over that as it comes together. And also, I want to thank Rachael for what she's doing in terms of organizing, finding these areas where we can consolidate information, and someone else mentioned it too, to try to make it easier wherever possible for folks throughout the county to find sort of one-stop shopping. And we've been trying to do that at the Spdc. And for anyone watching this later who isn't quite familiar with what we do, we provide free confidential one-on-one business advising to anybody who comes asking for it. In a typical year, 2018, we saw 175 clients, 2019, 191. So we bounce around 200 people a year that come in the door, and we work with sometimes once, sometimes many times. About 40% of these people, generally speaking, in normal years, are pre-venture. That means they haven't started their business yet. So far this year, we've already seen 173 different clients. And we're a third of the year through, and that doesn't count we think it's somewhere between 75 and 100 other folks that have reached out to us via text or Facebook Messenger. We get a lot of that, and calls early morning, late at night. People are stressed, as you know, and it's been interesting. Well, the only reason I volunteer those numbers is I checked today, and as of May 1st, the SBA has loaned just a hair over $3 billion in Oregon. And you'd like to think that Lincoln County is 1% of Oregon, roughly. And so we can figure maybe that's $3 million. And it's not quite that, because there's a larger share of the funds that have gone, I think regrettably, from some of the SBA's emergency funding have gone to larger institutions, generally speaking. That's changing a bit with this latest tranche of funding, but if I had to peg it, I'd say we've probably seen an influx, at least in approved loans, not necessarily all received yet, in the neighborhood of $2 million from the EIDL and the PPP, the two main SBA loans. And if you're a business out there watching this, you know what those are. So I won't go into that. The clients we've seen, that 173 people, we know that we've secured just over $300,000 working with them on different loan applications. What we don't know is, the folks who woke up today, we heard from a client already today who woke up and saw a deposit in their account. That's kind of the way it works. So there's not a whole lot of communication when it comes to the federal money. And I think it's safe to say, many of you have been on calls with me and business owners and other folks in the county. I think it's starting, we've been really good as a business community, I think, in rallying around the cause and the steps taken. I certainly am there. I think personally, I haven't necessarily spray painted "Go Home" on the asphalt anywhere near where I live, but I did find myself a couple of days after the governor's first order to please stay at home, her request that we stay at home, that first weekend, you all remember, I found myself looking twice at out-of-state license plates, and I've tried to be better. I'm better now, but it is something that we've been so good at, and I think nerves, and it's just a function of the longer we go. You know, we're talking right now, I think the best estimates are, if we were to start the reopening phase now, maybe 30% of the businesses that employed our neighbors and delivered our food and sold us their services pre-COVID might likely be gone. And I think that percentage could climb. I think we could get into 40% and even worse if we get into June and beyond. So we all know the timing of how spring break became spring broke, and that was just terrible. I don't really want to go into that. I had some prepared remarks, but I'm going to follow Wiley's example and try to get to Q&A as fast as possible. I will say that that what folks have not liked is I think they've perceived over-promising and under-delivering, especially on the Fed side. And I think that our Lincoln County banks were kind of caught in the middle of this. Just briefly, I'd like to give a shout out to them because they've done a remarkable job. And I don't know if you know this, but the day that we first were able to apply for the biggest of these packages called the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, our banks in Lincoln County got an email at 4:30 in the morning that told them how to process and administer these loans. And they were expected to throw the doors open to the line outside, who had no idea that they didn't know what was going on, at 9 o'clock, and start servicing those. And they were really in an impossible situation. They've done amazing work. And I can say that for the clients we've dealt with, I don't really know of anyone who was really trying to get a PPP from the get-go who hasn't at least filed their application. So I think they've done a tremendous amount of work and should be commended for that. I'd like to throw it open. Who'd like to, any questions for the SBDC?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Hall, questions?
Yeah, Dave, I was talking with somebody yesterday. She is a farmer's market vendor, basically, an artist, a craftsperson, and this is how she has supported herself. And, I saw over the weekend that the Farmers Market Association is working on a reopening plan, but she was saying, she's not eligible for unemployment. She hasn't been eligible for the SBA loans. She just got her website this year and was wondering, and I had to tell her I didn't know, but I would start asking around, is there any kind of opportunity for aid for folks like that?
Well, a couple quick things. You mentioned farmers market, so I want to mention some breaking news that I'm sure Rachel's aware of, but maybe a few others. The EIDL loan portal from the SBA went active again today. We were very excited. In fact, I jumped on Facebook and shared it. And then I read the fine print that it's open to agricultural businesses, folks who fell at the opposite end of the scale when the big businesses were taking huge chunks of the available funding. And so now it's specific to ag-related businesses. When you mentioned farmers market, that's where my mind went. And then, of course, we talked about how this person is a crafter or an artisan, and so that may not apply. But I just wanted to get that out there. And we try to post all these various sources on our website. And when you're there, which is OregonCoastBusiness.com, we do have the local, there's a lot going on locally, as it has already been mentioned twice this morning. The city of Yachats was first with a loan program managed by Community Lending Works. It's available online. The city of Lincoln City went live with sort of a grant fee for services program that I'll leave it to their website to explain to you. That went live last week. The city of Newport tonight is taking up a grant program that could be up to $1 million in total, with up to $10,000 grants with a very simple application process, depending on what the council decides to do with that. So please stay tuned for that. So if you're, if the person who reached out to you lives in any one of those communities, I would ask them to check into those. I would ask them again to verify that they say they think they're ineligible for unemployment. Everything we're getting from our friends in Newport and in Salem and elsewhere from the employment department says apply, apply again, and apply again. And so we would encourage her to do that, or him to do that. And let's see. They're also free to reach out and meet with one of our advisors. That, again, our advising is free and confidential. There's also roundtables. There's one happening right now as we speak. We have them every Monday and Wednesday, and they're populated by folks with questions just like that. And our team is there live, and if we can't find the answers during the call, we'll contact them back. So you might have that person reach out to me, and I'd be happy to do my best to answer any more questions.
At any rate, morning. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Central Lincoln's Public Affairs Manager, but that covers a lot of different areas, and communications is part of it, but I'm also a certified economic developer, having worked for the county's nonprofit economic development agency for 13 years. I was honored to be asked to help, and I've been talking with Wiley as well as with Dave Price, who I've actually been talking with quite a bit since all this started happening. Dave has been doing weekly conference calls on Wednesdays to interface with the state, regional economic development folks, legislators, as well as the various chambers, and it's been tremendously helpful to have these calls. Lots of great information every week. It's well worth participating. So thank you to Dave for running those. Commissioner Jacobson indicated that she was looking for some possible ways to utilize either transient room tax or video lottery funds that the county receives, or both, in the most efficient and effective way to get the best value for the dollar. And I've been working on some possibilities. As it turns out, my schedule has changed a bit in terms of less workload, simply because this time of year I would be neck deep in parade entries. Believe it or not, in our service area, we have 8 parades just in the summertime, and our entries tend to be very layered. I have as many as 50 people participating, both employees and family members of employees, as well as members of the public with their cars. It requires a lot of logistics. It's looking to me as though none of those parades are going to go forward. So that is a great opportunity for me to help the county in whatever capacity I can. So I'm happy to serve. I'm happy to clear my calendar and be of service.
Really appreciate you stepping up, Chris. And part of what we've asked Chris to do is, you know, we have transient room tax dollars. However, rules on what you can use those things for have not been waived. So we still have to, you know, kind of find a creative way to stick to the rules, but yet use this money in a way where it's most needed at this time because of this emergency. So that's something Chris is going to be working on trying to find a way to use these dollars for the way we need them now, and yet still making sure we're using them in a legal fashion. I guess questions for Chris from commissioners. Commissioner Hunt, questions for Chris?
No, none at this time. I like the idea of trying to be creative and finding ways to put the funds to the needs of the county.
Okay, Commissioner Hall, questions?
Yeah, maybe more just, I think, a very broad scoping question. I mean, are we talking about a coordinated marketing plan to, to bring people in from the outside? Are we possibly talking about, well, Lincoln City last week, I know they took 1 month of their TRT money, and they get a lot more than we do, and essentially have set up a program to buy lodging passes and product from local vendors, just if they can document pretty simply if either they've been closed or their operations have been curtailed because of COVID. And I just saw a message that Newport City Council may be looking tonight at committing up to as much as $1 million in direct business aid. So I guess my question is, are we looking at marketing, direct aid, or possibly both?
I would recommend a combination. However, I'd like to do significant consulting with the heads of the various chambers of commerce, as well as leads with regard to lodging, restaurants. The sport fishers are working on a plan that could be incorporated. There may be some great opportunities in terms of supporting those efforts. I think we're not going to have a whole lot of trouble getting folks to come here. We're moving into our high season when it comes to tourism. When they're allowed to come, they will come. And marketing can be extremely expensive. So we need to be super strategic in how those dollars are spent. And that might be something that the destination marketing organizations might take the lead on, but we might be of service using the money to help businesses in other ways. I think there's some potential for some creativity that also can be quite effective. Business owners want to get back to business. The question is how to do that in a way that is mindful of protecting our own residents and our healthcare system, and helping people to play here safely. I think they'll come. People are cooped up. It's just a matter of the right ways to get them here.
Thank you, Chris. I agree, and I like I said earlier, I think Chris only kind of came on board to our team here very, very recently. So I have asked her to put together kind of a draft plan. I know she's been working on that, and we will get that out maybe at a public meeting later on, or out to commissioners to review, or however she kind of decides to move forward with that, and working with Wayne and Wiley and Rachael as well. So give her a few more days, and I'm sure we'll have more information. The other thing I wanted to add is that in terms of marketing, because we're talking about Lincoln County TRT dollars, and that marketing would be done, for the whole county, not one specific city within Lincoln County, but for the county as a whole.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Chris. Next up on kind of reports or reports from commissioners, I think also if we had kind of general discussion items that we wanted to talk about, I think now would be the time before we move on to completely different decision action items. So Commissioner Hunt, any reports from you or anything you want to discuss?
Well, I'll just say that I think that the contrast between the two meetings we had last Monday, the Board of Commissioners meeting and the joint work session with the cities, is quite striking, and I think it's in a positive way between the content of today's meeting. A week ago, we were dealing with closure issues, and today, clearly, we've discussed or had conversations about a variety of ways in which we will be putting together a coordinated and phased reopening plan. And I think that's an indication of the change, if you will, as far as how the COVID situation is affecting our county. And I think the fact that we've got these key players involved in putting together or helping to put together a plan is the good news and certainly in the right direction. That's all I have.
Commissioner Hall, either reports or discussion items?
I guess just on discussion, I want to echo Commissioner Hunt's thoughts that this is good to see so many threads moving forward, and we're in I think a very challenging balancing act here that we want to have a good, thoughtful plan, for reopening, good plans for reopening, recovery, and then in terms of immediate assistance that we could do to some of the hardest hit businesses. Again, looking at whether the Lincoln City and now Newport templates might be helpful. We want to get it out thoughtfully and accountably. At the same time, I won't belabor the points, but we know that some of the various state and federal programs, obviously, $2 million lent, more than 2 million SBA. Some help is reaching some people, but I just feel like anecdotally there are still a lot of folks either don't know how to get help or are falling through the cracks, or they try once, get discouraged and give up. And, I guess I hope we can send a very strong lifeline, the best we can within our resources soon.
I would just, go ahead.
If I may, Chair Jacobson, I'd like to add a thought. I think the reports that we heard today from these different representatives were very effective and very meaningful. And I'd like to suggest that maybe we make reports from these individuals or appropriate representatives a part of our weekly meetings until we're, shall I say, well into the recovery phase. So I think that would be helpful to me, and I think it would be helpful to our residents.
I agree with that. I think we've had continuous updates from public health, but now as we're kind of moving more into this recovery, reopening, I think it's important to maybe add updates from those two things as well. I would also just add that I completely agree with what both you, Commissioner Hunt and Commissioner Hall, have said. Going last, I don't have a whole much more to add other than to say yes, I agree with all of that. I would also just say this is maybe a little bit into the weeds and detail oriented, but as the county looks at using, potentially their TRT dollars for existing loan programs and making those a little bit different. To help businesses now that have been impacted by this, I would just say that we need to make those resources as simple for people to use as possible. I love the idea of kind of a one-stop shop, which saves time on the business owners, but also just making it an easy application process for them to use, and then an easy process for them to actually get that support or help on the back end as well. What we don't need in this process is a lot of bureaucracy. We just need the help. I would additionally say that I think we need to make sure some of those resources and information are also available in Spanish. We do have a lot of Spanish-speaking business owners, so I would just say that if we need translation services or whatever, some of those documents or application places, I think that's also important to invest on. I know we also did recently just bring someone onto our team in that role, so we potentially have an internal resource we can use to do some of that work. So just a few little details to think about there. I want to again thank everyone that presented today, Nicole and Rachael and Wiley and Dave and Chris. I just really, really want to thank all of you for stepping up. Just thank you. We have a really fantastic community here. And all of you are good examples of stepping up into roles that probably March 1 you didn't know you would be in. So again, just thank you for stepping up and helping us with all of this.